Hello, everybody. So, welcome again to Rev Runned. I wanted to be in my office this week, but it takes a lot of time to make sure that things are painted well and that everything goes according to plan. So, this is episode 40 of the Rev Runned's Ramblings, and I want to talk about the NBA Finals, church history, art history, and then ultimately, I don't touch on current events a lot, but I want to end on that. I will give you guys some lighthearted quizzes before we enter into the church history aspect, but just a heads up there that today you need to put your thinking cap on, and it might be a little bit longer than 20 minutes. We will see. If you were not aware, I love the NBA. It is my favorite thing. That being said, I have not been able to watch as much NBA action as I've wanted to the last 15 years or so. I do remember watching lots of basketball at Moody. I remember so strongly watching the Dallas Mavericks get swept in the first round by the Warriors way back in the day, where the Dallas Mavericks for the first time ever were the number one seed. It was brutal. It was heartbreaking. But that being said, we're not talking about Dallas Mavericks, although I will find a way to make this only about the Dallas Mavericks. So the NBA Finals are going on right now, and it has not gone according to a lot of people's thinking. We have the San Antonio Spurs being beat 3-1 so far by the New York Knicks. And so I try to not be too emotionally invested into professional sports simply because none of these people know me. None of these people really care that much about who I am, or if they were to know, maybe some of them are really good people and they would care, but they don't know who I am. I am a pastor in the Midwest, and neither of these teams are Midwest. But some people might assume that I would be a San Antonio Spurs fan since I was born in Texas, but that would actually be the reason why I am not a San Antonio Spurs fan. So being a Dallas Mavericks fan, it's really hard to cheer at all for anything related to San Antonio since they were such a tough conference rival all those years. But with that being said, I'm actually going to be hoping for the New York Knicks to be winning. Maybe by the time that some of you listen to this, whether you listen to it on June 13th or later, the Knicks might have won. Now, why would I want the New York Knicks to win? First off, they have not won a championship in forever. But secondly, Jalen Brunson, their guard, was a Dallas Maverick for a few years. He seems like a really good, decent guy. And then also Jose Alvarado. I'm all for the undersized guards doing something and them actually accomplishing something in the NBA. So that's my 2 cents on cheering for them. I also think that the San Antonio Spurs, they're going to get a chip the next couple years. If not them, someone from the West. The West looks super strong. And then as far as the New York Knicks, they're going to have to overcome a healthy Boston Celtics next year. And the Pistons, man, we are going to get a second scorer, and we're going to be really dangerous. So this is kind of like the one opportunity for New York to win. So I kind of want them to get it just from that standpoint. Not that we should ever place a lot of energy or thought or care into the professional sports world. I will put it this way, though. One of the things that breaks my heart just thinking about this, since this is supposed to be me rambling and nostalgia, it really breaks my heart that we have all the gambling in professional sports. I listen quite frequently to the Dallas Mavericks Locked On podcast, and then was listening to the Pistons for a while too. Just back and forth, getting their input, their thoughts on the NBA and everything else, clearly from the lens of those two teams. But it just breaks my heart because the number one sponsor of those two podcasts, or of the Locked On podcast as an entirety, is a sports betting and website. And it just breaks my heart. Gambling is a major issue. It is not healthy. We need to be smart with our finances. I really don't like how many people are just taken out to the dry cleaners from the standpoint of the little money that they have, they waste gambling. So it breaks my heart to see sports go into this area. So this is my pastoral 2 cents to you out there, if you care, is please don't gamble. there really isn't responsible gambling. I hate how much gambling has affected whether or not people think that a game is thrown or a ref is not doing things the right way. So, all that to say, it'd be pretty neat to see Jalen Brunson and Jose Alvarado get a title. Though Luke Cornett from the San Antonio Spurs, he seems like a really stand-up guy. Really proud of the fact that he stood up to the NBA and said, hey, we shouldn't have this game where we're honoring a historic seedy business. I'll put it that way. He said, we can't claim to be about caring about people and then let this establishment be honored tonight. And then the NBA pulled back, and it didn't happen. But then also Kelly Olynyk is on the team. He was born in, I think, 91, 93, somewhere in there. So it would be neat to see a guy who's been in the league that many years get a ring. But that being said, it's like 65% caring about the Knicks getting it from a standpoint, and then 35%, I'm just happy for NBA basketball. All right, so here is a quiz that I gave my junior high and high school Sunday school class a couple weeks ago, and I'm wanting to know how many of you are capable of doing this. This was my way to figure out what a baseline theological and historical understanding my Sunday school class had, then kind of figure out what they want to learn about over the summer. Since catechism is done for the summer, it's all of the grades, junior high and high school, are coming together. And here's my quiz. Now I'm going to see if you can answer this correctly. So what is the definition of sanctification? Is it A, to grow holy, B, to go to the sanctuary, C, to fly a kite, or D, to go to church? The answer is A, to grow holy. What is justification? Is justification A, to meet Justin? Is it B, to be made right with God? Is it C, to get away with sin? Is it D, being on the Justice League? If you answered B, to be made right with God, you are correct. All right, what is theology? Is theology the study of bugs? Is it the study of time, the study of God, or the study of dogs? It is C, the study of God. Now, I know the folks out there who deal with dyslexia might be frustrated that I would put C and D on it, but sometimes you just see how much people are paying attention to what they put down. All right, next question. How many books are in the Bible? A, 55, B, 66, C, 60, or D, 52? The answer is B, 66. Now, if you have questions about the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha or deuterocanonical books, you can ask that later. Put it in the comments if you know what any of those words mean. There's 66 books in the Bible. There are 24 so the Old Testament is 39 books, and in the Hebrew canon, or the Hebrew list, it's 24 because certain books are absorbed into others. So you don't have 1st and 2nd Kings, you'd have 1st Kings. You don't have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you just have Chronicles. The minor prophets are usually one book together, or stuff like that. So anyhow, there's 66 books in the Bible. Now, we are saved by A, baptism, B, confirmation, C, confession, or D, grace through faith. The answer is D, grace through faith, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. All right, what is the purpose of Sabbath? Is it to A, be efficient, B, to rest, C, to watch football, D, to make God happy? Now, for many of you, you do think the purpose of Sunday is to watch football, but the Sabbath is actually Saturday, and it is resting, so B, to rest. The purpose of Sabbath is actually to show that you have faith that God is able to do something without you. And also, interestingly enough, the Sabbath was mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy to the Hebrew nation as they are about to enter into the Promised Land, saying, hey, look, you were once slaves in Egypt, so you know what it means to work without stop and without break. So as you enter into this new land, make sure that your servants and slaves, the people who are foreigners amongst you, they don't deal with what you dealt with, because you know what it was like. All right, who was the disciple who betrayed Jesus? Was it Thomas, Andrew, James, or D, Judas? All right, I gave you the answer there. Try not to take too long on each of these slides. So what is the resurrection? Is it when God makes all things new? Is it when aliens come? C, when the rapture happens? Or D, when Luther wrote the 95 Theses? Now, some of you might be confused because the answer that you would have thought would be there of when Jesus rose from the grave. So this is where theologically the resurrection has two definitions in theology. There's the one when God the Father rose Jesus the Son from the grave, showing that he had accepted the sacrifice on the cross and that sin had been defeated. But then there is actually the resurrection in when you look at biblical theology, whenever you look through the New Testament, it is most frequently talked about from the standpoint of that moment whenever those who are dead are raised to life and God makes all things new when the new heavens and the new earth appear. So it's actually pretty neat. All right, who is Martin Luther? Hopefully everyone knows this answer, but I understand if you don't. Was he A, German priest who opposed the Pope? Was he B, a missionary to Spain? Was he C, a French priest who opposed the Pope? Or was he D, a World War II fighter pilot? It is A, German priest who opposed the Pope. Now, he wrote the 95 Theses just a little bit over 510 years ago, and he was a reformer, is what we call him now, but he was someone who just wanted the church to take back some of its stances because it wasn't in Scripture. There's a lot of misconceptions about Martin Luther. A lot of people think that whenever he nailed the 95 Theses to the door, is this dramatic moment in the night where he's going under the cover, but then there was this rain and lightning, and it was super dramatic. I've been to the door that he nailed the Theses to, and it was the cathedral doors would have been the town bulletin board back in the day. So you and I should not go around nailing things to church doors, but that's what they did back in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. All right, what is the longest chapter in the Bible? Is it Psalm 91, Psalm 119, Psalm 53, or Luke 22? Psalm 119. It's an acrostic, has a lot of verses. Which of these is not a book in the Bible? This is the one that I'm wondering if you know. Is it A, Hezekiah, B, Judah, C, Haggai, or D, Elijah? So which of these, is a book in the Bible? And the answer is C, Haggai. It is one of the minor prophets. It's very small, near the end of the Old Testament. All right, ultimately, last one of these questions. So where did William Carey go as a missionary? Was it Russia, Brazil, Germany, or India? The answer is India. All right, so this quiz, hopefully no one is like, oh no, I didn't answer any right, or prideful, I got them all right. We have so much Bible and history and theology stuff to cover that as someone who has an undergraduate and a graduate degree in Bible and theology, it's amazing just how much more I'm learning every day and how I'm learning each week. And then by teaching, I'm reminded of what I've forgotten. So I challenge each person to actually work to continually expand your knowledge base on these things. And if you grew up like me in the fundamentalist church where we maybe emphasized a little too heavily the head knowledge of things, you know what? It's okay if someone doesn't know these questions. Not everyone knows who William Carey is. Not everyone knows who Martin Luther is. Not everyone knows the longest chapter in the Bible. The question is, do you know Jesus or not? All right. Now, this is where last week's quiz, though, was specifically to introduce a history, so historical theology, because my students said, hey, we would love to learn more about historical theology. Now they didn't say that exactly, so I asked, do you want to know about history, the development of things that we believe inside of churches? And they said yes and yes. And so this is the quiz I gave them. And I gave this as an introduction to the person who I'm going to talk about on the next slide, which is pretty silly that I'm trying to make this dramatic or not. But, all right, arrange these figures chronologically. Jesus, Martin Luther, Aquinas, and Jerome. Now, the correct order would be Jesus, 1st century. Jerome would have been the 4th and 5th century. Aquinas, if I'm remembering correctly, the 13th century. Then Martin Luther would have been the 15th and 16th century. Arrange these events chronologically. The Diet of Worms, Jerusalem Council, Vatican II, Council of Nicaea. Now, this is more so my question of, do you know what any of these events are? And so the oldest would be Jerusalem Council, that would have been like AD 50. And then we have the Council of Nicaea, 325. And then we have the Diet of Worms in the, I think it's 1517. And then the Vatican II, which would have been either late 1800s or 1970. I completely forget which century that was in, but obviously it was after the Diet of Worms. Now, all of those are incredibly big events inside of the history of the church, and so I challenge you to look at those on your own. Now, which of these verses talks about Jesus being God? One of the big, I'm just super surprised that this is actually a talking point again right now, but what it means to be a Christian means that you're following Jesus. Now, the question is, which Jesus are you following? Are you just following a prophet? Are you just following someone who is a good guy? Or are you following the Jesus of the Bible, the one who is capable of actually redeeming you from your sin? So I ask this because people assume a lot of theology, and Christianity for 1,700 years has officially recognized together that Jesus is fully God and fully man. That he is not a created being, that the Trinity has eternally existed as three persons, one being. And that the primary passage that is used is John 1:1. So Psalm 51:10 is, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Genesis 1:1 is, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Romans 3:23 is, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 1:1 is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So John 1:1, huge verse there in the debating of the church. There's this guy named Arius who said, well, there was when there was not. So talking about Jesus was not always God. And so it seems like a very empty debate, but that is actually one of the current things that is being debated. Is there are people who are wanting to say we are officially a Christian religion, and they don't believe that Jesus is God as defined by 1,700 years of church history. Also, another interesting thing that I'll point out later is people like to say that it was at the Council of Nicaea that Jesus became fully God, but it's not really that case at all when you look at history, because obviously John 1:1, Jesus was fully God. The debate was actually whether or not Jesus was human until many centuries later, where the battle was against Gnosticism and stuff like that. So anyhow, that's a big, long conversation. The next question is, who was considered the first pope? Was it John the Baptist, Martin Luther, Constantine, or Simon Peter? The first pope is Simon Peter. There's this thing called the Petrine Succession, where the current pope is supposed to be able to trace his whether educational lineage and the training all the way back to Peter. I'm trying to think, it's something like 236 is the line of succession that goes all the way back to Peter. This is one of the issues that divided about why some people have left different denominations. Is so the Anglican Church also tries to claim to have Petrine succession, and I think there's something in the 2000s where the ELCA and the Anglicans were trying to say we're on the same page, and there are some churches inside of the ELCA that were like, hey, we don't hold to that whole Petrine succession and interpretation of Matthew 16. So interesting there. But all right, what language was the Bible originally written in? The Bible was originally written in what language? Latin, Hebrew, Greek, all the above, A and C, or B and C. So the answer is actually Hebrew and Greek. Now, some people might argue, well, there's also Aramaic in it. Well, if you're going to argue that it's Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, Yeah, you could also argue that it's Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and Latin, because there are a couple Latin phrases mixed in there, but it was Greek and Hebrew. And that's important for this week's Sunday school, because I talk about the Saint Jerome. But that's not what I talked about last week. All right. Now, for those of you who are like super bored by this, I apologize. But this is just a quiz. I gave it to my Sunday school class, and I figure my mom would enjoy this, as well as I know Johnson, one of my friends, he's a professor in India. I think he'd enjoy this, as well as Chad. Give a shout out to Chad. You're faithful in listening to this. So, yes, I have 3 people who listen to it. And I'm going to send this out to my athletes from South Fulton. A lot of them were in the FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So let's see how many of them would know these questions. It might involve looking at it. Sorry, guys, you can't just listen to it. But anyhow, all right. What does the word Catholic in the creeds mean? So in the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Athanasius Creed, what does the word Catholic mean? Is it what the people who follow the Pope believe, which is A, B, universally held, C, Lutherans, or is it D, what English speakers believe? So what does the word Catholic mean whenever we say one holy Catholic church? It actually means universally held. So the word Catholic means of the whole. It is a compound word, so it just means something of the whole. Now, if you grew up like me, where you were like part of the, Christian Missionary Alliance as a wee lad, and then you grew up in the independent churches, you would. So the moment you step into a Lutheran church and they recite the Apostles' Creed and say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and at the end they say, I believe in one holy Catholic church. You go, what are we doing? I thought this was a Lutheran church, and now they're saying we're Catholics. Like, you just go crazy, and you're like, well, that's why we don't believe in denominations in the first place. So that was kind of one of my first reactions, sort of. Not really, but that was like boiling under there, and people have asked me, why do we say Catholic if we're not Catholic? And, well, the word Catholic means of the whole. Now, at Moody, Dr. Brian Litfin made us recite the Apostles' Creed each day at the start of our Western Civilization 1 class. And so I had to memorize it way back in the day, not too far back, but about 20 years ago, I learned that. All right. Second to last question. What does the word creed mean? Is it A, what is believed, B, a lead singer of a 2000s dad rock band? Is it C, a First Nations tribe that lived in Canada and Montana? Or is it D, the Ru'ul, who live in conflict with the reptilian scrolls? All right, I really hope someone got the humor of all of those options. Creed is A, it's what is believed, so it comes from the Latin credo, and so it is the statement, I believe. So we call a creed, but it's a statement of belief. Ultimately, the last question, in what country is the city of Nicaea? Is it in Greece, Turkey, Italy, or Israel? Now, this is a trick question. It's a trick question because ancient Greece is not all of... So current countries were in ancient Greece, but they are no longer Greece. So Nicaea is a city in Turkey. Modern Turkey would have been ancient Anatolia, all to say. So hopefully you enjoyed that quiz. All of that was to set up Saint Athanasius of Alexandria. The famous phrase is Athanasius contra mundum. Now, Athanasius was a great scholar. He was from the region of Alexandria, which is the Egypt, the modern Egypt. He grew up in a wealthy family. He was trained in the ancient rhetorics and all that jazz, and he assisted the Bishop of Alexandria and eventually became the Bishop of Alexandria, and he became the bishop with much chagrin. He did not want to be a bishop. In fact, there's a neat little thing in church history where people who were priests or would have been what's called part of the episcopate, where they were overseers of church in some fashion, but not really a bishop. They were people who catechized, who confirmed, who baptized, who preached, who wrote letters back and forth arguing different things, who went to councils and everything else. councils that I misspelled here, but I think I hopefully am able to edit that in the full thing. Oh my goodness, Nicaea is Nicea, not Nicia. Now that being said, you can argue in the transliteration, blah, 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 blah. Anyhow, so he was raised by a bishop, essentially, who recognized from a young age that this was a knowledgeable man, and Alexandria is one of the foundational cities inside of church history. In fact, so there's the Antiochian school of interpretation and the Alexandrian school of interpretation. The Alexandrian school of interpretation is one that Origen would be from, and if you know anything about the church father Origen, which I'm surprised if you do, but anyhow, he was the allegorical way of interpretation and thinking would be what he'd be known for by modern Bible. So from a Moody Bible Institute Bible interpretation standpoint, Alexandrian school of interpretation, it takes a lot of liberty with the text. Now, that being said, St. Athanasius did not. He was part of the Council of Nicaea that battled Arianism. So this priest named Arius, I mentioned in one of the previous slides, said that there was when there was not. He kind of had this idea that Jesus was not fully God. And at the Council of Nicaea, it was not first said, but it was kind of officially stated where Jesus is fully God, fully man. The Trinity is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and we cannot have the death of Jesus Christ actually accomplish what we say it did if Jesus was not fully God and fully man. With him being fully God, he was able to bear the eternal punishment that sin would be. So only an eternal sacrifice could bear the brunt of the sins of the world for all eternity, because sin is an eternal punishment. For the wages of sin is death. But someone who had to be from the line of Adam would be able to take a spot as a representative of Adam. And so where Jesus is fully man, he was able to actually take in that spot and be a substitution. So it's called the vicarious penal substitutionary atonement theory, where Jesus takes the place of humanity and does so by taking their guilt upon his shoulders. And on the cross, he took the penalty. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And so he was part of that big conversation, and he did a lot of letter writing. He did a lot of stuff on. So the Council of Nicaea was 325, and it's interesting because in 303, the emperor at that point in time said, let's just straight up destroy Christianity because it is divisive. These Christians don't adhere to the things that we adhere to. They don't do the things that we do. I don't like this. Like, they're dividing my empire. Like, they are a corrosive aspect to my empire. So there was this massive persecution in 303. And so Athanasius doesn't write about his family being part of that, but it would have been part of the whole aspect that people lived in, because which Augustine, who's a later church father, talks. There was the Donatist and the Montanist controversy over would priests who denied the faith during the persecution of 303 be allowed to, would their baptisms be considered valid if they had baptized someone? We think that's not really a big deal, but then talk about who's allowed to baptize someone now. Talk about who's allowed to confirm someone, who's allowed to give communion. We deal with kind of the same Montanist and Donatist controversy. But anyhow, I'm getting way ahead of myself with that. So then, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine had seen a vision of Jesus, and he said, "You will conquer in this sign." And it was the key rho, the X with the what looks like a P in the middle, but that's actually key and rho, the first two letters of Christ in Greek. So he says, "I'll do it." And so then he conquers his enemy. So Rome had divided into 4 kingdoms instead of being one after the death of an emperor, and so then they were kind of battling it out as to who would be the ultimate emperor. So he conquers, and one of the other guys, and so then he talks to his ally and says, "Hey, how about we make Christianity legal?" So Christianity was made legal, I think it was around 312, and so Christianity started to flourish a little bit from a standpoint of it's no longer persecuted. But then, because it's no longer persecuted, you had these heresies that were kind of made huge. And so at 325, Constantine is like, hey, this isn't good. He had made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire at some point. And he's like, hey, we got to be united. This is not good that we have these big divisions and separations. So he called this council, and hundreds of bishops and priests came together. And they're all like, yeah, let's work this out. Let's figure this out. And one of those was Athanasius. Another one was Arius. And another guy is this little guy named Nicholas. And the legend goes that St. Nicholas, yes, that St. Nicholas, was so upset and grieved that this guy named Arius was preaching a invalid view of Christ that he actually punched or slapped him. Now, I'm pretty sure our source is Eusebius on this, so someone who should have a pretty good firsthand account, but a lot of myths and legend developed over the years. But Athanasius is a pretty cool guy in my book because, well, there's a Latin phrase, Athanasius contra mundum, which is Athanasius versus the world, which was essentially his view of saying, I will hold true to orthodoxy, meaning right teaching, right worship of God, no matter what. In fact, he was exiled 4 times for a total of, I think, 17 years during his 48 years as being a bishop. And so with that, after Constantine there was an emperor who was an Arian, and so then with Athanasius being a bishop, he was exiled because he didn't just say and do what the Pope at that point in time had wanted to do. And this was also kind of really interesting during the life of Athanasius and then Jerome and Augustine. There was this debate as to who is higher. Is it the Pope or is it the Emperor? And there was a big development over how they interact with each other. All right, all that to say, last Sunday, I talked about spiritual formation, and so we're talking about history in the last couple slides. Here are 3 depictions of Jesus. If you know these depictions, you are really in a thin group of people unless you had already had these explained. So on the bottom right, I had seen this before and I had forgotten about it. And then a friend, Kerry Shago, he was teaching our youth group a few times a couple summers ago back in Astoria, and he brought up this depiction. And it is, so this is Alexamenos worships his God. And this is, you can see there's this guy on the left, and he's looking up towards a figure. And this figure is is attached to a cross, and it has a donkey's head. So there is onology, is the study of donkeys. Evidently, there is this big issue in the early church where they were accused of worshiping a donkey. And in fact, we have this all the way back to Josephus and his arguments against Apion. And then we have Origen against Celsus. So those are just me rambling about stuff. Anyhow, this was discovered in Rome in the 1850s, and the best estimate is that this is this graffiti sketched into a wall was done around 200 AD. So we're talking 170 years after Jesus died. We're talking less than 120 years after the Bible was finished. We're talking during a time whenever Christianity was really growing and spreading, and there was a lot of the early church fathers talking about stuff. All right, why does this matter? I think it's just really interesting that the oldest depiction of Jesus that we have is, one, a blasphemous depiction, someone accusing Christianity of something that is untrue, but more important, I think it is that we have a crucified Jesus. Our faith that we have is one that we worship a Jesus who made himself lower than he actually was. He made himself into the form of a servant, like God taking on flesh, and then whenever he was walking around this world, like he, instead of having stately form or appearance, him using his power and everything else, he lowered himself, and he actually lowered himself to a meandering homeless rabbi who would oftentimes have instances where there's little to no food. He says, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man, where does he lay his head? But then also, like, he washed his disciples' feet. He lowered himself. And then with him being on the cross, like, he took the place of us. The wages of sin deserves death. But then also, like, Barabbas was released instead. So I think it's really interesting from a historical standpoint. Like, this is being one of the oldest depictions of Jesus, the oldest one that we've been able to figure out. I'm sure there were older depictions of Jesus, but not everything lasts as a testament of time. Also, on top of that, I do think we need to remember that the first generations of Christians were primarily Jewish, and if they believed that Jesus was God, they would have thought that it was a breaking of the Ten Commandments, where it says, "You shall make no graven image of me." So, obviously, something changed in church history, because we have in the top left Michelangelo's Pietà de Maria. So this is a sculpture, an amazing sculpture of Mary holding her dead son after he had died on the cross. And I put that up from a form of spiritual formation in contrast to the picture on the upper right, where you and I, if we are followers of Jesus, we want to look more like Jesus. We want to be more like Jesus. And it isn't like a two-dimensional painting or drawing where, like, there's not depth to it. Like, if you look at the works of Michelangelo, his times where he took marble and carved it out, it's amazing. Something had to be removed. There had to be a picture that was in his brain of what he wanted it to look like. And I think it was someone asked, I'm pretty sure he carved the David famous statue, and someone asked him, like, how did you know what was in there? He said, David was always in there. I just had to remove what wasn't him. And so I think that's part of this picture of spiritual formation that David and I are working through in our sermon series on spiritual formation, which you'll see the two apples in the background. We have so much in our life that needs to be carved out, because contrary to looking like Jesus and trying to figure out what he looked like, in the upper right, we have this thrift store Jesus. So shout out to Heath McNeese, one of my favorite artists of all time. He had this awesome song. So when I bought this picture of Jesus from a Goodwill, my friend asked, what good was this? He said it cost me $1. It looks like Richard Marx, but kind of hood still. So if you know who Richard Marx is, again, shout out to you. I had no idea who it was till I Googled him. But like, this concept is Jesus is so often depicted as this white Jesus. So he made to look like us. But then remove the racial component. Like, we want Jesus to look like us, which is crazy because he doesn't. Jesus was not 6'2". He was not white. He was not the same as me. But part of the reason why we want him to look like us is because we don't want to change. But then the beauty, though, that I want to point out, though, is that Jesus took on flesh and he dwelt among us, meaning that he met us where we are. And so when we look at the history of how Jesus is depicted, so back to St. Athanasius Contra Mundum with the idea of who was Jesus, like, the incarnation of Jesus Christ is one of the most mind-boggling things in all of Christianity. And with that, I'm going to close with something that is really frustrating. I usually don't touch on current events, as you know. But there's a current event that happened in Chicago that I just want to just blatantly say is terrible. There was a cross burning in Grant Park, and if you don't know anything about cross burning, I'm jealous of you, because this is something that a lot of people think hasn't happened in a long time, or doesn't happen, or you don't know anything about. And there was a period where racial reconciliation was a really big deal in the United States, and during that time, I was doing a lot of studying on hate groups and what is the reasoning behind people doing racist things. And a lot of people have a misconception about burning crosses, and they think that it is anti-Christian. And this is what makes me really, really, really mad, is because it it is blasphemous to the cross that this is done. But the idea is that they are lighting the cross on fire as a light towards truth, which is just so gross. It is a scare tactic meant to intimidate African Americans, primarily in the history of cross burning done by the KKK, and it is just horrid, horrendous, gross, because in the name of Christianity, they're trying to spread hate. And so there's just a little bit, there's a lot that can be said about it, but I want to point out, just first off, the Bible starts off in the first chapter saying that every man and every woman is made in the image of God. So from that standpoint, if you are trying to play a race superiority card, or race inferiority, or any form of eugenics, which is the thinking that some genes are better than others, some people are better than others, just Genesis 1, right in the beginning, boom, no, don't do that. And then Genesis 9, if you, like, the shedding of blood is so egregious because that's someone who was made in God's image. James 3:9, it says that how can you curse God in one moment? Oh, no. How can you bless God in one breath and then in the next curse someone who's made in his image? So James 3 is a wonderful, powerful, really challenging chapter of the Bible. But it kind of stands against this idea that you could curse any people, that you could take any race of people and say, oh, they're less than. No. Genesis 1 and James 3 combined for this reality that male, female, and people that you like and people that you don't like all bear the image of God. So you got to be really careful on how you talk about them, how you treat them. Man, and then, so anti-racism, there's a lot that I can cover on this, but John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world. It doesn't say that for God so loved one race or one group. It's the world. Then John 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It doesn't say some, doesn't say most, it says all. And then Colossians 3:11 says, here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. So as Christians, we don't think that in any sort of race or anything else comes before you to be able to know Jesus. So there's the status of we're all sinners, and then we all have the opportunity to be saved by grace. So are you bowing your knee to Jesus or not? It grieved me to see this cross burning for a lot of reasons. One, as many of you might know, I went to school in Chicago. That's where I went to Moody Bible Institute, and I know people there, dear, wonderful people, and so Chicago has been through a lot. It doesn't need intentional race war going on. It doesn't need this antagonism. Then the other area, too, that just grieves me on this is a lot of people were saying, oh, this is fake, this isn't real. They're trying to deny the reality of hatred and bigotry in our world today. This should grieve us. It should shock us that someone would be so open about it, but this should not surprise us that this exists. So back to my quiz about what is the resurrection. And the resurrection of all things, we will, when God makes all things new, and the new heavens and the new earth, the question is, are you part of the kingdom of God, which has all people of all nations and all languages and tongues, or are you against that? And I don't say that as some sort of like threat or scary intimidation. Like, do you love Jesus? And what gets in your way of loving all people as Jesus would love them? So this rambling was, it covered a lot of different things. Hopefully people like the format of me having slides, background, picture. I know it got heavy, and I know it got very heady whenever I talked about the different theological concepts and terms, but I don't talk about current events very often, but this really, really angers me. Jesus didn't die for people to do racist things in his name. I know racist things have been done in his name for centuries. Don't get me started on all those things. It really angers and frustrates me, which is why I was proud of the Pope for at least taking the step, saying that The Catholic Church apologized for its role in the spread of slavery in the world. I could, again, that's a long, different conversation where there was an actual decree by the church in the 1400s that said, "Go conquer in our name," and that's part of what Columbus had the blessing to go do. Either convert or they're inferior. Not what Christianity is about. But anyhow, you guys don't listen to this to get into current events. You guys like hearing about my history, my thoughts, my things, which is why I wanted to throw in the NBA finals there. I have such dear memories of watching the NBA championships with friends. Some of them were not as dear whenever the Spurs beat the Pistons. Some of them, like I said, weren't very, watching the Dallas Mavericks lose, it wasn't fun. I remember 2006, whenever it's like the Dallas Mavericks are winning, they're beating they're beating them. They're beating Miami Heat. They're beating the Big Three. And then, I went out to Colorado with Youth for Christ, and while I was there in Colorado, not able to watch the games, Dallas lost the rest of the series, and then Miami Heat won. So anyhow, all right, everybody, I love you. Enjoy this very long rambling. For those of you who stick it all the way through, please like or comment on this, because a 46-minute video where I ramble and talk about these things will get zero love on the algorithm. So if we want to get 24 people to watch this, we got to engage with it a little bit. Love you all. Bye.